Great. Hello, thank you for joining the 17th BA/ presentation. I'm Monique Ho, your host today. I'm on my impact holiday in Hong Kong, working at a non-profit called the Good Lab. I'm responsible for their digital strategies, exploring how digital tools can enhance the insight collection for their place-making projects, facilitating the co-creation of more user-centric and fit-for-purpose public space among the government, civic society, professional bodies, and other sectors. And if you are new to BA/, a big welcome to you. I started BA/ community at the start of COVID. The aim is to connect people and different expertise and insights for the evolving market needs. And I'm also joined by Pam as a co-host. Pam, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, so I came across BA/ through a colleague of mine. I've been sort of in the industry sort of 20 plus years. I was looking for something that would kind of just sort of, you know, when you sort of keep in touch with your skills and just sort of build that sort of knowledge. I mean, I was doing a lot of networking on the British Computer Society, so I kind of came across Monique, and then Monique was just sort of all inspiring, and I thought, well, actually, I'd quite like to be part of this. So that's how I've come across. I mean, I'm currently a BA hybrid BAPM at an energy provider at the moment, and so quite involved with this community. And yeah, that's how I got interested, and I've really enjoyed some of the talks that we've been doing, and then came forward to kind of start doing some co-chairing and hosting. So yeah.
Thank you. Good. Next one. So just a few housekeeping points. So you will receive the slides and the recording after. And your line is muted right now, or please, if it hasn't been muted, just mute your line because we are doing a recording, just to keep it quite a clean one for people who want to catch up the episode later. You are very welcome to unmute the line for the Q&A after. And you can also put your questions in the chat box. I'll be monitoring the chat box throughout, collating them and ask the questions towards the end. And I know that some participants, you can't see the chat box right now. In that case, feel free just to join the discussion by unmuting your line at the end. We also really appreciate your constructive feedback. So do give your feedback on the poll later. It will be the same link for what we will be using for the presentation. Let me just share the link here. By the way, on the slide later, we'll share with you the link, so don't worry if you can't see the chat box. So it's the poll EB link. Last but not least, you're invited to stay behind for a festive catch-up. You can tell I'm pretty Christmas ready, Pam as well, Audrey as well. So yeah, so stay behind just to catch up before the end of the year. Right. So if you like BA/, I would invite you to spread the word with your contacts, tweet us, follow us on LinkedIn, on YouTube, because every post, every tweet, every message you make, let's go further. As a community, we treasure your views of how a community of this type would work for you, for me, for everyone. So do get in touch. Today, really great to have Aurelie to present on a topic that may not come up in day-to-day conversations a lot, but is something that really challenge investment decision within an organization. I feel really great to have Aurelie here because we actually met on day one when I first started running BA/. I remember her message to me to say that, oh, you know what, I watched your presentation on Lightning Decision Jam, and I'm really going to try the technique, try the methodology with my team next week. And that's how we met, and we stay connected, because I asked her you need to present for the community, because I know that you have lots of stories to tell us with your track record of experience. So yeah, so without further ado, let's let Aurelie to come on the virtual stage, and we'll give her some round of applause as well. Thank you.
Thanks for the introduction, Monique, and hi everyone. So that's my turn to share my screen, and hopefully everything works perfectly. So here we are here to speak about how to measure and communicate project value right today. And the first thing we will do is ask you to share your experience. And for the first time in my life, I will ask you to use your phone or your laptop during this presentation. So what you really need to do is to log onto this site. So you can see, hopefully, the site at the top. So you've got two options. Either you can log onto that site, which is paulf.com, with my name, and or you can use your phone and text to this number. So so you've got two options, and the first question we'd like you to answer is how often do you measure value and benefits on projects? And you've got three options, and after there will be another question for you. So so please tell us if you've got any issue logging onto the site. Oh wow, we've got some yeah, really interesting answer. So so we've got sometimes, and for someone within the attendees doing it all the time. Oh, I need to. Okay, so I don't know how I will do this. Oop. So there are people waiting in the lobby. So back to the survey. Good. So have you all voted? Yeah. So we can move to the next one. So but that's good. We've got most of the time at least people measuring value. So the next one is slightly different. So now what you should be able to do, hopefully, if that works to plan, is to enter words to answer the question, what are your top challenges that are preventing you from measuring project values? And so the plan is for you to be able to just type words of those challenges, and they should appear in the on the screen. Any more for any more? Okay. So I'm trying to screenshot it at the same time because I think that's yeah, really interesting. Excellent. Has everyone participated in? Yeah, oh, more coming. Great. So let me screenshot this. Great. So thank you very much for your answers. So I'm back now on the presentation, and so what I will also quickly do is to introduce myself. So like what Monique said, so I'm Aurelie, so I've been a business analyst now for quite a while. I mean, I think more than 10 years, and working mainly in retail, but more recently in real estate. So at the moment, I'm a lead business analyst at MacArthur Glen. So it's a company that got outlet centers all over Europe. But before this, I was managing a team of business analysts at Lunsec. And Lunsec is a real estate company who owns offices and shopping centers all over the UK. And most of the theme that I will present and the knowledge that I will present today come from my experience at Lunsec. So starting with a quick introduction and why I wanted specifically to speak about this topic. And I think it's because, I mean, traditionally, when I think of all the experience I've got and the different company that I work for, and I don't know, I mean, that would be really interesting at the end to share, for you to share your own experience, but IT is most of the time seen as a support or really cost burning function, and not as someone that really adds value, you know, to the company. And indeed, when I joined LearnSec, that was because there was a new CIO who joined and wanted to change this perception and mindset of IT within the company, and wanted to stop being thought as only fixing laptops and VC toolkits, and wanted to show that we were also enabling the delivery of the strategy, and thus the creation of my role, and thus all the work that I did on benefits and value estimation. And so that's why what I wanted to explain to you and talk to you about today is how, by measuring value and benefits delivered by project, we can gradually change the perception that people have about the IT function. So in order to cover this topic, so the first thing we will do is understand the why, and starting with the communication aspect. Then we will move to the definition of value, because there could be a different definition of it. We will then cover the when and the who in terms of measuring those benefits. And I will also explain what else we did that also helped. I will then walk you through some lessons learned, and I can tell that we learned quite a lot, because that's been quite a bumpy journey. And finally, I will wrap up with key learnings before we move to the Q&A. So why the first thing to do is to change how we communicate about project. And here I will ask you to imagine. So imagine that you are a shop owner, and you've got this really successful shop, and now you are really successful, but you kind of quite ambitious too, and you want to think bigger. You're happy with your shop, but you still want to sell more. So, and your plan is to kind of tackle the online market and to increase your income by selling online. And you really want to achieve a revenue growth of 500K within a year, which is quite ambitious, but you want to think big. And so that's your benefits. So you go to an agency that design amazing website, and they are so excited and really happy to work on this, and they work really hard. And for the first time, I mean, they deliver your website on time and on budget. So you are super happy because you've got your website and that's your output. But however, when you measure the benefits after a year, you haven't, realized the benefits because you only delivered half. And I think from this, I mean, in theory, that's a success because the project has been done. So from usually, I mean, a tech point of view, when we think we think in output, so we tick the box, we deliver the website, so we can move on. But in reality, when you think of it and you take a step back, I mean, the value hasn't been realized. So which sometimes can give quite a bitter taste, to our end user, because finally we haven't really delivered what we've committed to do it. So, however, I mean, I'm aware that sometimes it's not our fault, if the value hasn't been delivered, because there could be lots of factors, explaining this. But sometimes it's also because we only focused on kind of meeting and delivering things on time and on budget without really thinking of our end user and the outcomes at the end we were after. So, and so that's why I think that's important. I mean, of course, to think in terms of output, but try to take sometimes a step back and think more in terms of outcomes. So the first thing also I want to walk you through is the value definition we used and the model we used when I was at LearnSec. So for us, everything started with the customer experience. And what I mean, customer experience, what we call customer wasn't only external customer, because I was working on back office project. So it was also internal customers. And they came to us with pain points or opportunities. And from those pain points, we were trying to, define with them outcomes And don't worry, that's all terminology, but I will have examples to help figure out what I mean. But from those outcomes, we were also defining measures of success, because for us, the definition of a good outcome was something that could be measured, and one outcome could have multiple measures of success. So, and once we had the outcome, we tried to link it to financial benefits when we could. So when we understood, the scope, we were having session in order to brainstorm what the solution or the change would be, either from a tech point of view, people, process, or the three together. And then we would work to deliver the outcomes. So again, could be a system, new process, or new role. And once the output, would be delivered, we would make sure that there is the right change management activities in order to make sure that it's a success, and be able to check whether or not we delivered the expected outcome through the measures of success, and thus make sure that the pain point or opportunity were delivered or fixed, and that the customer experience was enhanced at the end. So that's what we used as a framework. So what does it really mean? Because that's great. I told you lots of amazing terms, but in real life, how can you use it? So what the example I had was, and I couldn't share all the information because I don't think I was really allowed to, but I will try to share as much as I can. But the example I had was at Trinity Leeds. So we had a shopping center, and here they had some really like a street food area where they could have vans coming for 2 weeks and selling, Indian food or French food for 2 weeks. So it was really short-term lease. And the problem they had was that there was a really poor customer experience, and the customer being the tenant of those vans, and also the process to onboard those tenants was really manual. And so that's the pain points that we were, or opportunities that we were after. So in terms of outcomes, what the business wanted was to enhance the customer experience, to also save some admin time, and to increase the collection rate, because of all of this, what was happening is sometimes we had tenants leaving without paying their rent, and so we were losing some revenue. So we defined some measures of success for all of them. So in terms of enhancement of the customer experience, we said that we would do a survey to check if we improve this experience. In terms of saving admin time, so we did lots of process mapping in order to have a baseline, and the plan was to reduce the time to chase a prospective tenant, and also to improve the data quality. And for the last one, and that was something quite tangible, because we could see at the end of the year whether or not we managed to get all the rent. So when the team brainstormed, so they agreed, and sorry, I forgot to mention, because I can't really see it, that at the end, the benefits we were after was some revenue protection and some cost efficiency. So that's what we wanted to measure. And when the team brainstormed, so they agreed that the output would be an app. And that's when I just have an issue, because it does, that's it, a new app and a new internal process. So the new app and the new internal processes were delivered after a couple of months. And a couple of months after, I went back to the business to kind of try to measure whether or not we delivered the expected outcome. I have to say it was a bit of a struggle, because we delivered the app just a couple of months before COVID, but already within a year we could see we could see whether or not we made some improvement. The only thing that we couldn't do is, of course, a customer feedback survey, because we didn't have enough data, but the concept in itself worked pretty well. So here you can see, although there are lots of terms, that's a really simple method that you can use. So I think for us, the big change also within the team, and that's quite funny because it made me think of this question, you know, when either, I mean, you need to be ready because someone asked you the question what you're working on, or the famous, you know, thing that if you are in the lift with a CEO or whoever who's asking what you're working on, how would you communicate on this? And for us, the change was to go away from I'm delivering, you know, alpha app or a financial app or things like this, to I'm helping to kind of improve the customer experience of our tenant and potentially have some amazing number to share about it. And at the end of the day, all of this, I mean, when you think it's the same thing that you're delivering, but you are communicating on it in a different way. And for me, that's a question of mindset. And that's the journey or the change that we really try to embed within our team. I mean, either from a BA point of view, but also from a tech point of view. And so what it means is, so you start from the output, and that's your tangible asset. So like the new sales system or the app for the tenant, like and I gave you the example. And from the output also, the output will help you to deliver outcomes. And you've got, so for instance, sales order process more quickly, but you need also to try to make sure that you've got those measures of success and you understand what quickly means, for instance, or what more accurately would mean. And from those outcomes, and that's the tricky bit, to be honest, you need to kind of understand the benefits, and that's something that really matters to the business. And you will have lots of assumptions that you need to make because lots of factors really influence, you know, how you go from your outcomes to your benefits. And in terms of benefits buckets, so I will give you some examples that we use later on, but it really depends on your business. So for instance, if I'm thinking in my scenario now, where I worked at MacArthur Glen, one of the key benefits or things that our project are after is increased footfall, because we want to drag more people in our shopping centers, because the more we drag people, the more they buy and the more our revenue increase. So that could be a benefit that you want to kind of surface when you're working on a project. So it's really case by case. And that's the buckets for us that we use from a value point of view. So the first one was revenue generation. So to be honest, we didn't have many projects in that, or kind of delivering this kind of benefits. Although we had some, because of course we were providing all the IT for new offices, and you can't really rent an office without technology. So for those kind of projects, we had some revenue generation benefits that we could claim. The cost saving one is most of the time the one that kind of is naturally linked to project we're working on, because it's about process improvement. But that's the one which is the trickiest one, because for us, for instance, in front of us, we had financial people. I mean, the CFO was the manager of my manager. And when they see that you are saving costs, which most of the time is associated to time saving, most of the time they think that they can get rid of people. And that's always the question that comes up. And that's what we didn't want to. I mean, most of the time when we were saving times, it wasn't, you know, luckily enough to kind of reduce FTE, but that was more to save some time so that people can do some more value-added activity. And that's the sentence we used. So of course, when you use this kind of standard sentence and you've got still the same people in front of you, they always ask you, you know, what the value-added activities are, and that's what you need to be ready for. So that's why if you use this kind of sentence, please make sure that you understand what the time will be used for. So the next bucket was cost avoidance, and this one is pretty cool because so it's the scenario where, for instance, so for us we had a system and we were using a SaaS solution, but it didn't deliver the functionality or the capability that we wanted. So we had a project to build it with our dev team. And so the cost avoidance was the fact that we were no longer spending any money for the license for the new tool because it was all internally managed. And this one was pretty nice because when you've got an investment appraisal, you can have it as a benefit, and it's something really tangible that impacts the P&L. So which means that nobody can kind of challenge the fact that you're delivering something or some value. So the revenue protection, I just shared with you an example, but that's also, I mean, you can't really, so this one is, usually you've got good data because you know how much revenue you are losing or potentially how much you need to protect. But yeah, it's quite a nice one also to have. The most challenging one for us was the risk reduction, because most of the time it's linked to, so for us, it was linked to data protection and GDPR and the risk of being fined, you know, if you've got some data shared with a bit too many people, you know, like all the things that you see, and I've got a couple of examples later on. And I think in that scenario, you have a fine which is 4% of your revenue that you need to pay, so it's quite a lot. But it's really hard to quantify risk. And most of the time you challenge on your hypothesis. But for us, what we did is we had a corporate risk register, and we tried to link any risk reduction to the corporate risk register, so that we were not claiming things that were kind of not true. But yeah, that was a bit of a challenge on this one, and it was definitely continuous improvement. So that's the bucket we were using, and I think for us the key things was, and it was based on the word cloud, it was around data quality, and that's the key point where you're doing this kind of thing. You really need to be quite confident on the number that you provide, or at least the assumptions that are behind those, because you will always be challenged. So moving to this. So this one was quite something that I wanted to communicate on, because that's examples where I think that, you know, there could have been some IT project that could have claimed some benefits if they would have been done previously. So, and I'm saying so because I'm thinking it gives you examples. So for instance, I mentioned the risk reduction, but when you're working on a project and it's about, you know, trying to avoid a data breach or things like this, it's good to have in mind those numbers, because it gives you an idea of sometimes how much a project can reduce risk, like what happened at Dixon Carephones, and they had to pay quite a big fine, or the one for Target, which is the 8th biggest retailer in the United States. And also when I look at the example, you know, at Dixon Carephone or the Tate Baker one, and those one are more about reporting and control on the data. Sometimes you can think that, you know, if they would have done some process improvement, for instance, or added a couple of control, maybe it would have prevented them from this bad press, I would say. So now moving on to the next slide. The technical issue again.
Should I start sharing my screen with that?
That's fine. Yeah, that works. So now moving to the when and the who. So when do you start measuring value and speaking about benefits? So here you've got kind of really high level project life cycle, and it works whether or not you're agile or waterfall. Because here when you deliver it can be iterative or not. And for us, we started quite early, although, you know, from an uncertainty point of view, that was quite high at the beginning. But the reason why we did it, it's because we wanted to use value to prioritize our project. And of course, through discovery and a bit of delivery, we were kind of refining our assumptions to have more and more accuracy regarding the numbers that we were giving. So that, I mean, measuring value and benefits can start with quite early. And however, if you want to communicate on outcomes, I mean, you can start from the beginning to identify those outcomes. So in terms of who, the good news is, as you all know, you're not alone. And although we as BA are responsible for measuring and helping the business on that journey, that should be the product owner and or the business owner who are accountable for the value. And also in theory, but for us it was more us, they should be also accountable to measure whether or not the benefits has been realized. So that's the theory, and sometimes, I mean, it takes a bit of time and change management to make sure that roles and responsibility are really clear, you know, across business analyst and product owner. So also one important point, so like what I said, the product owner or business owner is kind of the overall owner. But what is really important is the change management activities. I mean, and when I say change management, it's not the CAB, the technical thing that helps you to move to the to operation. It's the proper business change management to embed the new tool within the business processes. And again, in theory, that should be quite owned by the business, although sometimes as business analysts, we're quite involved in those activities. But for us, if we really want to deliver value, we need to make sure that at least it happens. Because the same thing, I mean, like what I said with the website or anything else, I mean, if you've got a system, it can be delivered, it can be amazing, but we need to make sure that the business use it and in the right way, or otherwise the value won't be delivered. So for us, so what we did is on all our projects, we managed to measure benefits. So we had, for instance, you know, that it will increase revenue or save some money. And also we had clear outcomes that would be delivered for each of those. So things that the business could really understand. So with those two types of information, what we did, and that's the art of possible. So we did some reporting. So we started reporting on value of our backlog, how much benefits it would deliver. And that was quite powerful. So at the beginning, of course, because we had this by phases, so we had it at the end of assess, discover, and everything. But of course, we were really cautious and were telling people that at the beginning or at the assess, when you've got value at the assess phase, I mean, it's quite. I mean, usually it's not really refined, I would say, so it needs a bit more time. But we started reporting on this. What we also did is we started communicating about our backlog, and because now it was something that people, even outside of IT, could understand. So we had an intranet, and what we did is we had a list of projects available for everybody to click on and to kind of see what IT was working on. We also use value to prioritize project, and we did it because the objective of the IT department was to focus the resources on what would deliver the highest value first. So that's why we started using value and complexity in order to prioritize, you know, what we should start working on and what could potentially wait a bit. And finally, what also we did in addition to measuring value was really to link any project we had to the strategy, and also to make sure that we link it to the corporate KPIs or measures of success that really matter to our company. So and by doing all of this, it helped to change the way that people thought about IT. So some of the lessons learned through this journey. So the first thing is you need friends to get on this journey, and friends sometimes, you know, at all level of the organization. So for us, we had lots of, so because like what I said, we were reporting to the CFO directly. So that's why in terms of data quality and numbers, I mean, we really had to be quite sure about the number that we were sharing. And we were quite lucky because we had the director of tax who was behind our approach. But by having him on our side, he was helping us to influence the CFO, and thus it helped us also to kind of embed this change within the organization. Also, what we did is we started small. So we didn't start, to kind of measure benefits on everything. We just started on a couple of projects just to see how it worked and learn from it. And based on this, kind of try to do it more and more. Like what I said, data is key. And I think it's, again, something that was raised in the cloud world. I mean, it's sometimes really hard to get access to the data. But yeah, that's something that the more, yeah, which I mean is a source of continuous improvement. It's also asked us to use one of our skills, which sometimes is forgotten as a BA, but it's the commercial awareness one. And I think for us, what I like specifically about it is to have to think about business strategy, and not only to think about your project as an isolated piece of work, that you do, but just to try to understand how it kind of helped the company to deliver the target numbers for the year. Like what I said, again, continuous improvement. I mean, for me, I was really humble at the beginning. I mean, saying we starting, we learning, and taking on board and listening every feedback that I received. And sometimes it was hard, I have to be honest, when you spend lots of time and effort in it, but it was worth it because we increased our accuracy. We also experimented a couple of methods, like what I said on the risk estimation of risk, trying different approach in order to get the numbers more accurate. And finally, I mean, it's about also being patient and try to persist as much as you can. So, but I think it's really worth it. So in conclusion, I mean, thinking in terms of outcome instead of output is a mindset, and I think it's really important to start on this if you want people to think differently about IT. So also as a BA, I mean, you're here to facilitate the process, but in theory, you don't own the data. So it's the business who should own the outcome, but you're here to challenge to them to give you some numbers, or also use any techniques in order to measure it. If it's process improvement, you can make some measurement or get data from systems to get some numbers. And also make sure that you don't do it on your own, but you get ideas and sponsors in all over the business, so that it will really make your life easier. And in theory, if you do so, and I had the last sentence to kind of wrap up everything, and again, the technology is letting me down, but the sentence was just to kind of say that by doing this, hopefully it will help you to change the way that people are thinking about IT, and move from these support stickers that sometimes we have on our forehead to a proper added value function. And that's it for me.
That's great. Amazing. Thank you for the sharing. So before we move into the Q&A, I just share the feedback link, the survey link. It's basically the same link that you used just now for the interaction. So use that for the feedback, and yeah, and I'll also put our social media links in the chat box. You can follow us on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter for the latest updates. So let's move on to the Q&A. I got questions from Colin about, he mentioned that, I have encountered resistance and skepticism when trying to communicate value of doing a project. One reason was that project sponsors didn't want to be held accountable for the achievements of benefits, and it may be easier if reporting to CFP rather than it is the CFO, CFO rather than CIO. Do you have any suggestions for overcoming this resistance?
Oops, that's a really good question. So that's quite a complex one indeed. Yeah, and to be honest, I mean, we had the same challenges at the beginning. Because I mean, what I found really funny, if I'm honest with you, is sometimes we've got the business doesn't come with outcome in minds. You know, when they come to us, they want a system, and sometimes you need to get them to take a step back to say, yes, you want the system, and that's great. But before we do so, I mean, what do you want from this system, or what are you expecting, you know, from this system to deliver? And I was quite surprised because when I was going to the business with those questions around outcomes, sometimes they were unable to tell me why they wanted it. You know, it just because they saw these shiny pieces of software somewhere, because they go to lots of conferences with amazing IT salesperson, and they come back from this and like a toy, they want it, you know, and they wouldn't think too much. But going back to your question, I mean, it's the fact is that's a really hard one, because in theory, I mean, benefits are owned and are, you know, time boxed, and like requirement. And to be honest, I mean, if they're happy to own the requirement, knowing that for each requirement you should understand the why, they should also be able to own the benefits, or at least or take ownership of it. Like what you said, I mean, maybe it was easier for us because we had, I mean, in front of us, we couldn't move from one stage to the other one if it wasn't really approved by the CFO, if there wasn't a strong business case behind it. So, but maybe, I mean, Colin, have you asked them why they don't want to own those benefits? I mean, just to understand, are they scared of it, or do they don't want to overcome it? So, because I think that would be the first thing, just to understand this resistance, and once you understand it, I mean, to try to reassure them if possible.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, great. Yeah, no, it was the CIO who just didn't want to be held accountable, because the numbers for success of the project were quite high. And he said, well, if I present those to anybody else as part of project approval, I will be held accountable for delivering them. And I don't want, and if it doesn't succeed, I don't want to be held accountable.
Yeah, that's the yeah, that's. I think for me, I might have been lucky because my CIO was pretty brave. I mean, and he didn't mind. And I know that when we were presenting numbers, I mean, more specifically, when you've got numbers under the risk reduction, I mean, it can quickly go up to millions, and you can quickly be challenged. And it happened to him. But because I backed it up, you know, with some assumption, and also we had owners of those. I mean, those numbers were not created by us. They were coming from the business also. So for each of those projects, I mean, we had numbers to kind of back up the reason why it was 3 million, or the reason why it was 100K. But definitely, I agree with you, Colin. They could. I mean, you need someone at the top who's a bit brave, you know, to be able to to do it. Or maybe you can start small. I'm thinking, if you don't come up with those numbers, but start with the outcomes, and instead of committing to deliver, you know, X amount of revenue generation, if you start by things like I don't know, saving some time, but kind of maybe, you know, just starting a bit smaller, you know, and just to start with people getting used to it, that could potentially help.
Yeah, that's a good one. I do have a question to follow up. I saw Gary, you put your hand up as well. Feel free to jump on.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. Yep. So just following on, really. I mean, I guess from a project management perspective, there's always the option to stop a project, and just because you've agreed to do something, I guess as soon as the project is sort of not going to achieve its benefits or its value, you should be in a position to say, look, guys, this project isn't worth continuing. So regardless of whether somebody wants to be accountable or not, they're still going to be accountable for either stopping the project or carrying it on. And I think if you can articulate the value and say, nope, the project is not worth continuing, then that's just as good as continuing it without realizing that value, isn't it?
Yeah, but yeah, totally agree. But for us, I think sometimes what you can find is to have this person again going back to being brave, who will be brave enough to kind of say, now we stop because that's, I mean, the value versus the cost is not worth it.
Yep,
so
exactly.
And I think for us that was a big thing, because through, and that's a really good point that you just raised, but because now we had numbers, whether or not people challenge it, we were in that position where we had some project where that wasn't worth it. So we could potentially, and I think we did it once or twice, so out of many projects, but that was still a success where we said, but let's stop it.
Yeah. And I really like that the discussion has kind of get into the space of like the governance piece. So, for example, Gary mentioned that from a product management perspective, it's from product owner or product management, they should be responsible for saying that, okay, where the investment should be, or are we actually achieving those benefits, whether this is still the best investment for the organization. I think the other part would be, Colin mentioned that at the moment, maybe some organizations, they are about reporting to CIO. In my mind, I was like, I wouldn't say challenge, but it's just figuring out, because ultimately for each product or each service that is we are delivering within an organization or to externals, the product owner, as already you mentioned, the product owner should be responsible for the benefits realization. They need to measure that. I wonder, because I saw on your slide, you have a very nice kind of reporting, kind of a dashboard to show like charts and all these. Like how are those kind of measuring or review mechanism or tools are embedded within the company? Because I think that's key. Is if we have a dashboard but no one is reporting, that's useless as well. So it would be great to hear your experience too.
Yeah. So the fact is, funny enough, exactly what you said. When you've got a product owner, I mean, in theory, it's kind of easier, and I see it now, with my, the new role I've got, because for them, they measured based on outcomes or value that they deliver. So they need to track for new feature that they implement, whether or not it's been successful. So, and in terms of tools that they can use, I mean, again, it really depends on when it's digital, because it's the website. It's quite easy for them to track, how many, for instance, I just have in mind a new loyalty app that we've implemented, and what they kind of tracking is how many new guests or customer they've got that subscribe to this new loyalty app. And they try to figure out the impact on the revenue, but they've got tools, because it's the website and everything, they can properly measure it. For us, I mean, that was really archaic, I'm really honest. I mean, and when we were working on some time saving, I mean, we were back to process mapping and back to kind of observing and measuring to be able to check how much we managed to save. So, and otherwise, I mean, the other thing that we used is if you've got systems that kind of track, when an activity start and an activity, stop, you could try to extract the data, but not all the system can do it, to kind of measure how long the process took. And I think for some of the finance system, we were able to do so, but it's quite time consuming, if I'm honest with you. And I think, like someone said, sometimes when we don't have time. I mean, as BAs, the most important is to gather the requirement and to kind of nearly move on to the next project. And depending on what you're working on, capturing all the data and being quite confident on it could be time consuming. I mean, I don't know if anyone else have feedback about it, or have different experience.
I would challenge that.
Okay.
Only because of my experience of seeing often a product. I mean, we can say the product owner needs to make that decision. Quite often they don't know all of these things. They look at the success criteria and the acceptance criteria, but they're not looking, say, underneath, or for example, if there's proof of concepts or something or whatever. It's kind of, I think it's like it's the a decision with all those IT stakeholders, which happen to be architecture, security, all of those coming together, and also the business sort of playing their part in saying, well, how are they going to use this system in anger? Is this going to really work? And, I think, I probably would have agreed exactly with what you've said there and said, yeah, that sort of, but I think in sort of, I'm not saying it's academic, but it's also that maybe that's like a textbook kind of answer, but in theory, the play out and also the dynamics of the groups of, and also we put another lens on top of that, the politics and everything else that exists within organizations, that the very thing that everybody should be championing or working towards the success of a project, and making some hard decisions that say, if it doesn't fulfill what we're looking for, or as we've moved down, gone through our sort of discovery of whatever the product is, we found out that actually our thinking has changed, and perhaps what we first thought, that's changed, and so this product or our thinking has changed very much so that we need to adjust accordingly. So I'm sort of like saying yes, nodding in belief, and not saying no, absolutely doesn't, that whole thing where everybody needs to come together and sort of communicate that yes, it fulfills what we're looking for. And it's, I'm not saying let's lay the blame at a product owner. I think there's a collaboration that needs to take place, and quite often the business are happy to pin it on IT, when really, we're here as a delivery vehicle for whatever you want, to drive value. If we really think about it, we're not here to justify ourselves, we're here to kind of do what you ask us. But if you don't know, or your thoughts have changed, or something has happened in that whole space, then no mudslinging, we have to sit down and work it out together what that is. So yeah, I'm probably sure people are all sort of seen that or experienced some of that or certain elements of it, but I just think, it's quite, even when we were going to do this, as a co-chair, Aurelie, like we were kind of looking at the topic and thinking, what value does IT add? And you're thinking, oh God, this is such a, a hot potato, and it's kind of, so quite often we become the bad guys because it failed because of this, or it failed because of that. Oh God, that we don't trust IT to deliver, and it's like, well, it's not all over here with us. It's not.
Yeah.
You need to stand and make those hard decisions to say, if it's not doing what you asked for, and something has changed along the way, then you need to kind of step up and say that. But I think that's the hardest thing, because now it's called, let's frame it in a way that doesn't, it's all CYA, isn't it? Let's make sure we don't look bad here. But those hard decisions aren't necessarily made because, as we've already said, certain sort of key stakeholders don't want to take ownership.
Yeah.
This is human nature. It's the complexity, and nothing has changed in all the time that we've all probably worked on projects. It's always, somebody just sort of going out there and going and saying what is. But and even if you do say what is, that is kind of quashed. It's also like, oh, how you said it, you're being disruptive. You kind of think, well, stating all the obvious, this isn't going to work. We need to address this. But those hard decisions or hard conversations don't want to be had.
Yeah. No, and I agree with you. I mean, it's not always the kind of top priority. So so I saw.
I was just about to.
From Pauline, so the value stream mapping. So I've heard about it, and I'm pretty sure that in the past I studied it. When I did all those BCS classes, but I have to be honest, I've not used it in that way. So I'm really. I mean, has anyone used the value stream mapping tool?
Maybe that's something that we should include as a future topic for these.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think it's definitely something that's more popular on different projects, and we should kind of get somebody who has the experience to share how they use it, and whether there's any kind of pitfall for using it, or have traps that we need to avoid. So I think that's a really good question and something to follow up on. also to the question or kind of thoughts of Pam very quickly before we wrap up. And I'm also kind of putting the solution hat on, because already you mentioned rightly, business analyst or whoever performing the business analysis function shouldn't be kind of taking all the responsibilities, because it's something that obviously the product owner will need to embrace. One part of it, I could imagine whoever doing that business analysis responsibility, maybe one thing is to help the product owner to really think about what would be the short-term, long-term benefits and outcomes for these kind of milestones or features. And I think, as a kind of little bit cheeky, like I think for an ongoing project, maybe having these measurements, having these outcomes captured and presented in a report is something of a requirement before that project could move on to the next stage, because it's all about we measure first, we review that measurement, and then we decide whether we should go into the next step. Maybe that would get kind of the product owners or whoever, like the sponsors are, to think about, okay, I really need to get it done. I really need to think about what to measure, and that should be agreed kind of like among the right stakeholders in the meeting. So yeah, that's kind of a quick thought to wrap up. And so I would say thank you so much, Aurelie, for your sharing. We do have the next event scheduled in for January. We have John, who will be sharing the design leadership. And I think it's really relevant for what we talked about, especially if you recall Aurelie's slide. One of the early slides was about understanding the pain points of users. And design thinking or design leadership is about that. You really need to have empathy with the user, ideally to co-create with them, not create for them. It's about create with them to come up with a solution, and then actively measure the benefits or measure the outcome of that prototype and reiterate. So it would be really interesting to hear from design thinking perspective of how the approach to achieve kind of a similar outcome. So thank you so much again for joining, and if you have any kind of questions or any thoughts and you want to stay behind for a festive catch up, please do. Otherwise, have a very good day, evening or afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you so much. Yeah,
Merry Christmas, everybody. Season's greetings.
That's great. Merry Christmas. Yeah.